Welcome back, everyone, to the What Worked for Me podcast. I'm Mike, the host, and today we have Jay coming on. Jay's lost about 60 pounds over the last couple years, and he's going to explain how he did it and what worked for him. So, Jay, is there anything else you'd like us to introduce you with?
Nope, that sounds good to me.
All right. So, um, before we dive into the weight loss, it's always a good way to take some time to figure out how we got to where you were at. So, how did you find yourself gaining the weight in the first place?
Gaining the weight in the first place just came down to no kind of regulation, just eating whatever I felt like it without any kind of thought about how crappy it was or how bad the food was or the serving size and just, you know, eating for the heck of it instead of like having any kind of mindfulness.
That makes sense. And how much weight did you put on? What was the heaviest you got up to?
Heaviest was 260.
And how are you feeling at your heaviest?
It was right at the peak of my depression, so it kind of just fueled that lack of confidence and um, lack of self-worth.
Do you feel like though the weight gain and the depression were connected, or were those separate things?
Um, Connected in some ways, but separate in others. Like the weight itself fueled some of that depression, but the depression itself was um, due to other causes. If that makes
All right.
sense.
Yep, makes perfect sense. So you find yourself at 260 pounds. You said you're depressed, you're not feeling very good. What makes you decide that you have to make a change?
Curing the depression. So after I kind of figured that out and got out of that, I had this new sense of self-responsibility and this like, well, I don't have to be this weight and I can change it. And so because I got over the depression, it gave me this self-responsibility and this ability to like just change what I wanted in my life. If I wanted something, then there's I can change that. And so that's when I started like monitoring and making the changes.
That makes a lot of sense. So, what were some of the changes that you made? Let's start with nutrition. How did you change your nutrition?
I started monitoring portion sizes. That was the big one. Stopped having the huge late night meal and stopped like eating like a lot of sugary and high calorie foods. And like, for example, instead of like eating a crap ton of ice cream or cake or crap like that when it, you know, was set in front of me, instead of having like much more smaller portions on those super high calorie foods.
That makes sense. And did you do any like macro tracking or calories during this?
When I first started, I calorie counted. I wasn't super strict about it, but basically it served its purpose for making me aware of how many calories I was eating per day and realizing how calorie dense some certain foods were. And so that I didn't have that awareness at first. I had, you know, I had kind of an idea, but because of that, um, it made me realize, wow, like this is how easily I can go way overboard on calories. And so I wasn't like super strict in calorie counting. I just used an app to log some foods. I wasn't doing it every day, but I did it enough to the point where I became aware of the foods around me. And so after a certain point, I stopped calorie counting just because I kind of had an awareness. And so in the back of my head, whenever I ate something, I was like, okay, I'm about right here. I can afford this many calories or this kind of a meal. And so it basically served the purpose of helping me realize what I was putting in my mouth. And so that helped me be a lot more disciplined and be like, okay, I gotta, I ate kind of a high calorie here, or like this, this like this thing I ate wasn't the most healthy. So the rest of the day, I'm going to keep it a lot more in a box and balanced. So that's how it first started out. And that in itself helped me just slowly start losing weight, because each day I just simply had an awareness, and that was enough for me to, you know, get my portions under control. Um, and then
That,
that started leading to other things to kind of like micro manage and tweak.
that makes sense. So, along with you said you changed kind of what you were eating, you also said you changed somewhat the times you were eating things as well. You said you avoided those like late night, sweets and things like that. Was there anything, did you give any thought to when you were eating or any patterns as far as like your meal timing?
Yes. So I noticed I had the least amount of discipline, at nighttime. That's when my appetite would surge. So I started either having a much smaller meal at nighttime, drinking a lot of water, or anything I could to curb that appetite, or I would delay breakfast or lunch for a certain amount of time so that, I was getting most of my calories in the middle of the day so that I wasn't as hungry at nighttime, and just kind of shifting, instead of having a big meal, really big meal, shifting it. So, um, my body kind of got used to smaller portions and kind of having some hunger throughout the day instead of just feeding that appetite. And then also shifting it to where, like, okay, if I have a bigger meal and have my big meal kind of lunchtime or late afternoon, kind of an early dinner, then later in the nighttime, I'm not going to be as hungry, and it will help me have a much smaller portion at nighttime and keep that to just like one small meal instead of multiple little meals or one big meal or just like binge eating.
That makes a lot of sense. So, along with these nutritional changes, did you take on an exercise routine when you started losing weight?
I didn't take one on. I just kept to one that I had been doing, um, and just kind of modified it. So before that, I've been, it was going to the gym maybe once or twice to three times a week leading up to that. Um, and then a little bit after I started losing weight, I kind of switched my exercise program to something a little bit more, like less time, but more intense. Um, but yeah, I had been going to the gym before that a little bit.
So you said you were going about, two, three times a week. What type of exercises were you doing?
So I started with kind of a powerlifting routine, so big barbell exercises, and then shifted to more kind of like um, a bodybuilder routine where it was different muscle groups with about 12 reps and multiple sets. But the thing that like worked for me, that helped me to be more consistent going to the gym, and have the time for it, and that finally got my arms to grow a little bit, and you know uh, it dropped my blood pressure to, it's not like I had terrible blood pressure, but um, I was monitoring that, and with a certain exercise routine, it dropped down to like really good levels, and my testosterone went up, and all these little kind of things that had me feel better was a more high intensity type routine where I would, instead of doing like 5 sets of something, I would just, do one set to absolute failure and then do a drop set again to failure, so that it was so basically high intensity taking
Just one
muscle
one
groups to
set.
failure. Uh, 1 to 3 on the exercises, depending on how far failure I took it.
Okay. And you said that you saw an improvement in your blood pressure and your testosterone scores. What were your, do you mind if I ask what the improvement in those are? Do you remember?
Not the exact, well, before I started doing the high intensity stuff, my average was like 130 over 80 or 130 over 90 in that range. And then during the high intensity, as I did that, it started dropping to, I think, uh, um, to like 115 over 60 to that area.
Okay. And how long did it take you to lose this 60 pounds?
Um, I believe about a year and a
About a year and a half.
so a year to year and a half thinking about it. So at my heaviest down to my lowest point, um, it was about a year or a year and
During this time, did you hit any plateaus where you kind of hit a wall?
a half. Not that I remember. Well, about I sort of hit a plateau right around 210, 205. That's when it um really kind of leveled out. Um, and then I got really sick for 1 week, and that dropped me like 5 pounds without doing anything.
Maybe not the
Um,
best way, but we'll count the
yeah,
win, right?
definitely, definitely not the best way. But when I stepped on the scale, I was like, oh, I dropped like 5 pounds in a week, and um, and then from there, I got to my lowest uh, shortly after that.
Okay. And then since then, have you experienced any regain? Regain's usually pretty common.
Yes, I have. So the past year, I've gone up, fluctuated a little bit, and then working on getting back down. And that's where I'm really looking at the little tweaks I can do that will work in the long run. Because some of the stuff I did before is just wasn't practical, obviously, for the long run. And so doing the little tweaks that I can do over and over without having to think about to help me not only lose weight, but make it a lifestyle versus just like a fluctuation.
How are you able to identify the things that weren't realistic for the long term?
The fact that like I'm too lazy to log every single meal of mine to count calories. So I mean, I've tried it again a little bit, but it's just either I'm too lazy or it's too much of an inconvenience to log every meal. But it's a lot easier for me to kind of be aware, and instead of trying to figure out exactly where I am wheel wise, I just kind of have a general idea, and I kind of aim to eat less than I need. So at the end of the day, I'm probably underestimate a little bit, but that's a lot easier for me to do than counting every calorie and logging each meal. But instead, just I'm aware, like, okay, this morning I had eggs and some ham, and then this for lunch I had some potato salad and some uh, you know, macaroni salad and some pieces of turkey. And so in my mind, I'm like, okay, the macaroni salad and the potato salad is much higher in carbs and calories. So for dinner tonight, I'm going to stick with something, smaller portion and mostly all protein.
So
So
really just moving more towards like an intuitive, less regimented type thing. That was one of the things you identified that wouldn't work long term.
yeah, exactly. And then also focusing on macros. I've found that like no matter what, if I don't nail the first meal of the day, that almost always leads to a day where I eat too much or I eat crap. But if I nail that first meal, like for breakfast being like mostly protein and something with no sugars or very little carbs, that helps me stay more full throughout the day, and it kind of sets me up for success for the rest of the day.
Just one of those key behaviors where you guys, I got to get this right to get the rest of the day
Yeah, and
right.
that's the one that I've like been very aware of, and I've been like looking like, why the heck did I have crazy cravings this day, or why did I kind of go overboard? And almost always it's because my breakfast started out as like crap I ate at a gas station, or something that wasn't thought out. So
That
just
Beto
making that
breakfast
first,
burrito.
yeah, those ones. Those hard to turn down a breakfast burrito, but that's kind of sabotages with the carbs and the just the high calories. But
That
um
makes sense.
so it's a lot easier if I'm not going to plan out all my meals for the day, because sometimes that's not practical, or I don't have the time, or is I'm running around, so I don't have time to like stop and get something. So just having that first meal thought out, and that first meal be a meal that I'm proud of, and not like, oh, why did I eat that junk? Or just the importance of that very first meal has really helps the rest of the day. And so that's like a practical step that it's like, if I just focus on getting that one done, then the rest of the day I'm a lot more mindful, and I have more satiety, and I'm set up more for success.
I really like that. So you've come a long way. You've lost about 60 pounds. I always think it's good to learn from your mistakes. What were some of the mistakes you made along the way that you would avoid if you could go back?
Uh, Gaining a chunk of that back, and because the first losing that 60 pounds, that first like 50 was relatively easy, because I've been eating kind of crap in huge portions for so long. I got up to that point, and then just simply being aware, smaller portions, and then it just started coming off. And so that made me kind of a little complacent. So as I started gaining it back, even though I wasn't, going crazy eating, um, just going back and telling myself, hey, like if I want to keep this off, I'm going to have to be more mindful than that initial loss of weight. I have to, you know, find the tweaks, as it were, to like maintain for a long period of time. But then as I gained and got to a weight where I'm like, okay, I'm noticeably a little bit bigger, um, gaining a chunk of that back. And so now it's like kicked me into like, okay, let's, uh, most of the time our portions are under control, but where am I gaining some of this weight back? And that's, and just monitoring and being very mindful of, each day, like, especially like I say at nighttime, because that's when, a lot of the stress eating happens, or the binging, and just like whatever. But the trap that I get myself into a lot, that I've, you know, noticed as I'm trying to dial it in to, maintain and lose back what I've gained and then go lower, is that mindset of, well, I blew it, so I might as well really blow it. It's not like there's like you
That
pass
binging
a certain amount of,
mentality.
yeah, you pass a certain amount of calories, and then these ones don't count because you've already overeaten, and it's like it all adds up. And so just like stopping myself if I, eat a little too much, instead of saying, well, I've blown it for the day, so I might as well just keep on blowing it. That's what's done me in more than anything. Because there's been several times where I've gone over, and just like reflecting, like, man, I've eaten too much today, instead of just like, okay, I'm gonna, stop it right there, stop my losses, it's been like, well, I've already blown it, so I might as well eat some more stuff.
And that's been just the biggest mistake that you've ran into again and again. That seems to get you.
Yeah, that's the big one because then instead of, you know, kind of a higher
Okay.
calorie day, it's a really high calorie day.
Right. Yeah, I think that's real common. I've seen that a lot. Um, the last question I'm going to ask you is, if you were going to give someone just one tip who's about to start their journey, what would you tell them?
Um, Awareness and the small tweaks that make you lose a little, but you can do consistently are a lot better than the big tweaks that you can lose a lot, but then it doesn't matter because you can't hold to that, so you just come back from it. So just having the awareness of like, okay, like because especially me, I had no ideas like one single piece of cake is enough for me to ruin a lot of my day because of it's like, man, there's a lot of calories in that. So that's why if I like give me a small slice instead of like, oh, like I give me like three slices, it's like that's a huge difference there. And so
Right.
just the awareness and then finding the little things that you can stick with versus like the quick solution like, well, I can lose 10 pounds in 2 weeks or 3 weeks if I do this, and it's like totally not realistic. It's like, okay, what could I do every day and I wouldn't have a problem with? And that's why like having just like a pure protein breakfast for me is like, I could do that most days, and that right there helps me, you know, keep everything in check. That's something I could do every day.
So just find those things that are you can do consistently. So I really like that. Thank you so much for your time. We're gonna wrap it up there, and I've learned a lot from it, and I'm sure the listeners have as well. Thanks again, Jay, and we will end there.